The thing about perfect suburban mornings is that they're usually hiding something rotten underneath. I learned this the hard way on a Tuesday in October, standing in my granite-countered kitchen while my husband Gregory delivered what he probably thought was a knockout punch. "We're splitting everything, Evelyn. You're on your own now." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I set down my coffee mug, the one that said "World's Best Mom" that our kids had given me before they went off to college, and studied Gregory's face. 43 years old, still handsome in that generic executive way, still wearing the same smug expression he'd perfected during his climb up the corporate ladder at Marsh Capital. His firm, his name on the door, his rules. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "And by everything, you mean? The accounts, the investments, the business decisions." He straightened his tie, a nervous habit I'd noticed over our 18 years of marriage. "You've never shown any interest in the financial side of things anyway." That was true in a way. I'd been content to let Gregory handle the money while I managed our home in Ridgeview Estates, raised our children, and played the perfect corporate wife at his endless networking events. But content and incapable were two very different things. "Of course," I murmured, turning back to the window that overlooked our manicured backyard. Beyond the fence, I could see Janice Fowler from next door, already positioned at her kitchen window with her morning coffee, ready to catalogue the neighborhood's daily dramas. "I suppose this has nothing to do with your recent late nights at the office?" Gregory's reflection in the window went rigid. "My work schedule isn't up for discussion." Naturally, I took another sip of coffee, noting how his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "Well then, I suppose I should start learning to pull my own weight." "Good." He grabbed his briefcase from the counter. "It's about time." The front door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. I remained at the sink, watching his BMW disappear down Maple Grove Lane, past the identical colonial houses with their perfect lawns and their perfect secrets. My phone buzzed on the counter. Gregory's name appeared on the screen, followed by the telltale sign of an accidental pocket dial. I almost declined the call out of habit, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was the way he'd avoided my eyes during his little speech. I answered without saying hello. "Told you she doesn't suspect anything." Gregory's voice came through clearly, along with the sound of his car's turn signal. "Evelyn's too wrapped up in her little suburban bubble to notice what's really going on." A woman's laugh filled the silence, light, musical, satisfied. "Poor thing. She really has no idea, does she?" "None whatsoever. You should have seen her face this morning when I told her about the financial split. She just stood there, like a deer in headlights." "That's what happens when you let someone else handle everything for 20 years, the woman said. I recognized the voice now. Lydia Parkson, the 35-year-old marketing director at Gregory's firm. Blonde, ambitious, and apparently very comfortable discussing my marriage while my husband drove to work. "She's completely dependent on you." "Not for much longer. Once the divorce papers are filed, she'll get her settlement and that's it. Clean break. And then we can finally stop sneaking around." "Exactly. God, I can't wait to see her face when she realizes she's been replaced by someone who actually understands the business world." The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in my suddenly too quiet kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear. I set the device down carefully and walked to my laptop, which sat on the small desk in the corner where I'd been managing household expenses and volunteer committee schedules for the past decade. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I opened a new browser window. "Day trading for beginners," I typed into the search bar. The results filled my screen. Articles about market analysis, investment strategies, risk management. All the things Gregory assumed I was too simple to understand. I bookmarked the first dozen links, then opened another tab. EM Holdings, I typed next, using my initials. The domain was available. I glanced out the window again, where Janice was still stationed at her post, probably wondering why Gregory had left earlier than usual. In a few hours, she'd be making her rounds. The grocery store, the dry cleaner, the coffee shop where all the Ridgeview wives gathered to dissect each other's lives with surgical precision. I deleted Gregory's voicemail without listening to it again. There was no need. I'd heard everything I needed to hear. Walking to my bedroom, I pulled out the small safe hidden behind my jewelry box, the one Gregory didn't know about, where I'd been keeping the household emergency fund for years. $5,000 in cash, money I'd saved from grocery budgets and small household allowances. Money he'd never bothered to track because it was too insignificant for his attention. Not anymore. I counted the bills twice, then locked them back in the safe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And Gregory had taught me something valuable over the years, even if he didn't realize it. The best moves were the ones your opponent never saw coming. My reflection stared back at me from the bedroom mirror, 41 years old, brown hair that I'd been coloring to hide the grey, wearing the same style of clothes I'd worn for the past 5 years. The perfect suburban wife. The woman who was too wrapped up in her little bubble to notice what was really going on. I smiled at my reflection for the first time in months. Good, I whispered to the empty room. Now I know which side I'm on. The Ridgeview Community Centre buzzed with the usual Tuesday morning energy. Women in yoga pants and designer sneakers, clutching their reusable coffee cups like shields, while they navigated the complex social hierarchies that governed our little corner of suburbia. I'd been coming to these gatherings for years, but today felt different. Today, I was listening. Tom Alden's been bragging about his new Tesla again, Claire Jennings said, settling into the chair next to mine. We'd been friends since the kids were in elementary school, bonded by carpools and PTA meetings. You'd think he'd invented electric cars himself. Men and their toys, I replied, keeping my voice light while mentally filing away the information. Tom was Gregory's old friend and business partner in several ventures. If he was spending money on luxury cars, his investments were doing well. Speaking of toys, did you see the Parksons' new kitchen renovation? Janice Fowler appeared beside us, her radar for gossip as finely tuned as ever. Must have cost a fortune. I heard Lydia got a promotion at that investment firm downtown. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Lydia Parkson. You know her, right? Blonde, drives that white Mercedes. She's always perfectly put together. Janice's eyes gleamed with the particular satisfaction of someone sharing prime neighborhood intelligence. Apparently, she's been working very closely with some of the senior partners. Very closely, if you know what I mean. Claire made a disapproving sound. That's just rumors, Janice. Honey, in this neighborhood, rumors are usually just facts that haven't been confirmed yet. Janice leaned in conspiratorially. My sister works in the same building. She says Lydia's been staying late almost every night, and there's definitely been some after-hours meetings happening. I managed what I hoped was an appropriately scandalized expression. Well, that's certainly dedicated of her. That's one word for it, Janice snorted. The conversation moved on to other topics. The Hendersons' marital problems, the new family moving into the old Morrison house, speculation about whether the Taylors could actually afford their recent European vacation. I participated just enough to avoid suspicion while absorbing every detail about financial situations, spending habits, and business connections. When the gathering broke up an hour later, I had a mental map of half the neighborhood's economic landscape. More importantly, I had confirmed that Lydia's sudden financial confidence wasn't just from her promotion. I drove home slowly, taking the long way past the newer section of Ridgeview, where the houses were even larger and the lawns even more perfect. This was where the real money lived. The hedge fund managers, the tech executives, the old money families who'd been quietly accumulating wealth for generations. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Gregory's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. "Hello," I answered. "Where are you?" His voice carried that edge of irritation I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Just getting back from the community center. Why?" "I need you to pick up my dry cleaning. And we're having dinner with the Aldens tonight. Tom wants to discuss a new investment opportunity." I closed my eyes, remembering Claire's comment about Tom's Tesla. "Of course. What time?" "7. And Evelyn?" His tone softened slightly, the way it did when he wanted something. "Wear that blue dress, the one with the pearls. Tom's bringing a potential client, and first impressions matter." "Naturally." After he hung up, I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at my house. 18 years of marriage, and I was still being dressed like a prop for Gregory's business meetings, still being positioned and presented like part of the furniture. But tonight would be different. Tonight, I'd be listening for more than just social cues. I spent the afternoon researching. The laptop, that had been relegated to household management, suddenly became a window into a world I'd been excluded from for 2 decades. Market analysis, trading platforms, investment strategies. I absorbed it all with the focused intensity of someone who'd finally found their purpose. By 6 o'clock, I'd opened my first brokerage account under EM Holdings and transferred half of my emergency fund. By 6:30, I'd purchased my first stock, a small position in a tech company that had been mentioned favorably in 3 different financial newsletters. At 7 sharp, I was standing in Tom Alden's living room, wearing the blue dress and pearls, smiling at his potential client, while Gregory launched into his practice pitch about market opportunities and strategic partnerships. "The key," Gregory was saying, gesturing with his wineglass, "is knowing where to look for undervalued assets. Most people don't have the expertise to identify real opportunities." Tom nodded sagely. "That's why we've been so successful. We see things other people miss." "Like what?" I asked, keeping my voice innocently curious. Both men looked surprised that I'd spoken. The potential client, a nervous-looking man in his 50s named David Chen, seemed particularly startled. "Well," Tom recovered first, "for example, we've been tracking several small biotech companies that are developing promising treatments. The market hasn't caught on yet, but when it does, the returns could be substantial," Gregory finished. "Of course, it requires significant capital to make it worthwhile, and the expertise to know which companies are legitimate and which are just hype." I nodded thoughtfully, filing away the company names they'd mentioned earlier in the conversation. "It sounds fascinating. I wish I understood more about it." Gregory's laugh had a patronizing edge. "It's not really your area, sweetheart. These kinds of investments require a certain level of financial sophistication." "Of course," I agreed, taking a sip of wine. "I wouldn't want to risk money on something I didn't understand." The conversation moved on, but I'd heard enough. By the time we left the Aldens' house at 10:30, I had a list of 7 companies, 3 investment strategies, and a much clearer picture of how Gregory's network operated. I also had something else, the beginnings of a plan. The next morning, while Gregory was in the shower, I transferred the rest of my emergency fund into my trading account and placed orders for positions in 2 of the biotech companies Tom had mentioned. Small positions, nothing that would attract attention, but enough to get started. Then I called Janice Fowler. "I was wondering," I said, after the usual pleasantries, "do you know anything about that new family moving into the Morrison house? I heard they might be in finance." Janice's voice brightened with the prospect of fresh gossip. "Oh, you mean the Williamses? He's some kind of hedge fund manager, I think. Very successful, from what I hear. They paid cash for the house." "Really? How interesting. I should introduce myself." "You should. I'm planning to bring them a welcome basket this afternoon. You could come with me." "Perfect. I'd love to." As I hung up the phone, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The same face, the same hair, the same suburban wife uniform of yoga pants and cardigan. But something had changed behind my eyes. Gregory emerged from the bathroom, already reaching for his phone to check his morning messages. "I'm having lunch with Claire today," I said casually, and then I thought I'd do some grocery shopping. "Fine," he replied without looking up. "I'll be late tonight. Big presentation tomorrow." "Another late night at the office?" "You know how it is." He kissed my cheek absently, his attention already focused on whatever crisis or opportunity was waiting for him at Marsh Capital. After he left, I poured myself a second cup of coffee and opened my laptop. My small biotech positions were already showing modest gains. Nothing dramatic, but enough to confirm that Tom's information had been accurate. I opened a new browser tab and began researching Lydia Parkson. It didn't take long to find her professional profile, her social media accounts, her recent real estate transactions. The kitchen renovation Janice had mentioned was just the beginning. Lydia had been spending money like someone who expected a significant increase in her income. New car, new wardrobe, a vacation to Europe that she'd documented extensively on Instagram, all on a marketing director's salary, unless, of course, she had other sources of income, or expectations of them. I scrolled through her photos, studying the timeline of her lifestyle changes. The expensive purchases had started about 6 months ago, right around the time Gregory had begun working later hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Still on for lunch? The new place on Elm Street." I typed back, "Absolutely. Looking forward to it." But first, I had a welcome basket to deliver and a hedge fund manager to meet. Knowledge was power, and I was just getting started. I closed the laptop and headed upstairs to change clothes. The blue dress was still hanging in my closet, the one Gregory had chosen for me to wear to Tom's dinner party. The one that made me look like the perfect corporate wife. I pushed it aside and reached for something else instead. A black blazer I'd bought years ago but never worn, paired with dark jeans and low heels. Professional but not trying too hard. Confident but approachable. The woman in the mirror looked different now. Still suburban, still respectable, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Time to go to work," I told my reflection. The Williams welcome basket was a masterpiece of suburban diplomacy. Artisanal cookies, local honey, a bottle of wine, and a carefully curated selection of neighborhood information. Janice had outdone herself, and I'd contributed a homemade coffee cake that had taken me 2 hours to perfect. "Remember," Janice whispered as we approached their front door, "let me do most of the talking at first. I've been the unofficial neighborhood welcome committee for 12 years. I nodded, suppressing a smile. Janice had no idea she was about to become my unwitting intelligence asset. Marcus Williams answered the door. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of making million-dollar decisions. His wife Sarah appeared behind him, elegant in that effortless way that money could buy. "How thoughtful," Sarah exclaimed, accepting the basket. "Please, come in. I was just making coffee." Their house was a study in understated luxury. The furniture was expensive but not showy, the art carefully chosen, the overall effect one of sophisticated comfort. This was what real money looked like when it didn't need to prove anything. "Marcus runs Pinnacle Capital," Sarah explained as we settled in their living room. "We moved here from Manhattan. The pace was finally getting to us." "What kind of work do you do at Pinnacle?" I asked, accepting a cup of coffee from a set of china that probably cost more than my car. "Hedge fund management, primarily. We focus on identifying undervalued opportunities in emerging markets." Marcus leaned back in his chair, clearly comfortable discussing his profession. "It's all about seeing potential where others see risk." Janice jumped in with her usual enthusiasm. "How exciting! We have several people in finance in the neighborhood. Gregory Marsh runs an investment firm downtown, Marsh Capital. You might know him." Something flickered across Marcus's face. "I know the name. We move in similar circles." "And then there's Tom Alden," I added. He's been doing very well lately. New Tesla, expensive renovations. He seems to have a good eye for investments. Tom Alden. Marcus's tone was carefully neutral. Yes, I've heard of him too. Sarah glanced at her husband, a look passing between them that I filed away for later analysis. In the world of high finance, reputation was everything, and apparently Tom's wasn't as golden as he liked to pretend. We spent another 20 minutes on polite conversation before Janice and I took our leave. As we walked back down their perfectly manicured driveway, Janice was practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see that house? And that car in the garage? They must be worth millions. They seem very nice, I agreed. I got the impression Marcus wasn't entirely impressed with Tom Alden, though. Janice's eyes lit up. Really? What makes you say that? Just a feeling. You know how men get when they're discussing business, all those subtle territorial markers. Interesting. Janice was already mentally composing her next gossip session. I'll have to pay attention to that. We parted ways at my driveway, and I spent the rest of the morning researching Pinnacle Capital. What I found was illuminating. Marcus Williams had a reputation for conservative, methodical investing and an almost supernatural ability to avoid the kind of scandals that periodically rocked the financial world. More importantly, Pinnacle had been quietly shorting several of the same biotech companies that Tom and Gregory had been promoting as sure things. I was still processing this information when my phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen. "I'm so sorry," she said without preamble, "but I have to cancel lunch. Jennifer's having a crisis with her wedding planning, and I promised I'd help her with the florist situation." "Of course," I replied, though I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. It was the third time this month that Claire had cancelled our plans for her daughter's wedding preparations. "We can reschedule." "You're the best. I'll call you later, okay?" After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. 18 years of friendship, and I was apparently less important than flower arrangements. It was a small thing, but it stung more than I cared to admit. I was still brooding when Gregory called. "Change of plans for tonight," he said. "I'm bringing a few people from the office for dinner. Can you handle that?" "How many people?" 4, maybe 5. Nothing fancy, just something to impress them. You know how to do that." I did know how to do that. I'd been doing it for nearly 2 decades, playing hostess to Gregory's colleagues, creating the perfect domestic backdrop for his professional ambitions. The dutiful wife who could be counted on to smile, serve, and stay out of the way when the real business was being discussed. "Of course," I said. "What time?" 7:30. "And Evelyn, this is important. These are potential new investors, and first impressions matter." "I understand." But as I hung up the phone and began planning the evening's menu, I realized that Gregory was right about first impressions. He just didn't understand whose impression was going to matter most. I spent the afternoon preparing salmon with herb crust, roasted vegetables, a dessert that looked complicated but was actually quite simple. The kind of meal that suggested sophisticated domesticity without requiring so much attention that I couldn't participate in conversation. At 7:15, I was putting the finishing touches on the table setting when Gregory arrived with his guests. I recognized Tom Alden immediately, along with 2 other men from Marsh Capital. The 4th person was a surprise, Lydia Parkson, looking stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Everyone, this is my wife Evelyn," Gregory announced as they filed into the dining room. "She's been kind enough to put together this lovely dinner on short notice." The introductions were made. The 2 men were potential investors from out of town looking for local opportunities. Lydia was there as the marketing specialist to explain how they positioned their investments for maximum appeal. "It smells wonderful," Lydia said, her smile perfectly calibrated for just the right amount of warmth without familiarity. "Gregory is so lucky to have someone who can create such a beautiful home." "Thank you," I replied, matching her tone exactly. I do try to make sure Gregory has everything he needs. Dinner proceeded smoothly, with conversation flowing around market conditions, investment strategies, and the usual blend of business and social positioning. I played my part perfectly, attentive hostess, interested but not intrusive, the ideal corporate wife, but I was also listening, and what I heard was fascinating. The out-of-town investors were specifically interested in biotech opportunities, the same sector Tom and Gregory had been pushing. Lydia was presenting a portfolio of companies that matched almost exactly with the list I'd compiled from their previous conversations. More interesting was what wasn't being said. There were subtle tensions in the group dynamic, glances between Gregory and Lydia that lasted a fraction too long. Tom's slightly defensive posture when discussing recent performance numbers, the way the investors asked probing questions that suggested they'd already done their homework. During dessert, one of the investors, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wells, complimented the meal and asked about my own interests. "I've been thinking about learning more about investing, actually," I said, ignoring Gregory's slightly startled expression. "It seems like such a fascinating field." "It can be," Patricia replied, "though it requires a certain temperament. Not everyone has the stomach for the volatility." "I imagine it's like any skill," I said. "The more you learn, the more confident you become." Lydia laughed, a sound like silver bells with just a hint of condescension. "It's certainly not for everyone. The learning curve can be quite steep, especially if you don't have a background in finance." "I'm sure you're right," I agreed pleasantly, though I've always found that underestimating people can be a costly mistake. The comment hung in the air for just a moment too long, before Gregory smoothly redirected the conversation to safer topics. After the guests left at nearly 11 o'clock, I was cleaning up the kitchen when Gregory appeared in the doorway. "That went well," he said, loosening his tie. Patricia seemed impressed with the presentation. She seemed very knowledgeable. I continued loading the dishwasher, keeping my tone casual. They both did, actually. I got the impression they'd already researched your recommendations pretty thoroughly. Gregory frowned. "What makes you say that?" "Just the questions they asked. They seemed to know quite a bit about the companies you were discussing." "Well, that's good. It means they're serious investors." I closed the dishwasher and turned to face him. "Lydia seems very competent, too. She certainly knows the material." "She's one of our best people," Gregory said, his voice carefully neutral. "I can see why you've been working such long hours together." For just a moment, something flickered in Gregory's eyes. Surprise, guilt, calculation. Then his expression smoothed back into its usual confident mask. "The biotech sector requires a lot of research," he said. "We want to make sure we're giving our clients the best possible advice." "Of course." I smiled at him, the same smile I'd been giving him for 18 years. "I'm going to finish cleaning up and then head to bed. Don't stay up too late." "I won't. Just need to review some documents for tomorrow's meeting." I kissed his cheek and headed upstairs, leaving him alone with whatever documents required his attention at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. In my bedroom, I opened my laptop and checked my trading account. My small biotech positions had gained another 3% during the day, while the broader market had remained flat. Either I was getting very lucky, or Tom and Gregory's information was better than I'd expected. I opened a new browser window and began researching Patricia Wells and her investment firm. What I found was intriguing. They specialized in identifying overvalued assets and market inefficiencies. The kind of firm that would be very interested in companies that were being artificially promoted beyond their actual value. My phone buzzed with a text message from Claire. "Sorry again about today. Rain check for Thursday." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Actually, I'm pretty busy this week. Let's talk next week." It was a small thing, but it felt significant. The first crack in the foundation of my old life. I closed the laptop and got ready for bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind was racing with possibilities, connections, and the growing realization that the game I'd started playing was more complex than I'd initially understood. But complexity wasn't necessarily a disadvantage. Sometimes it just meant more opportunities for those who knew how to look for them. The Ridgeview Country Club's annual charity gala was the social event of the season. 200 of the area's most influential residents gathered in the ballroom to see and be seen while ostensibly raising money for local causes. I'd attended for 15 years, always as Gregory's perfectly accessorized companion, smiling for photos and making small talk about safe topics like children's achievements and vacation destinations. This year felt different. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching Gregory work the room with practiced ease. He moved from group to group, handshake to handshake, his confident laugh carrying across the elegant space. Lydia was never more than a few feet away, playing her role as the competent professional colleague with Oscar-worthy precision. "Quite a turnout," Marcus Williams said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. "Sarah's manning the silent auction table, but I thought you might appreciate some company." "Thank you." I accepted the glass, noting how Marcus had positioned himself to have a clear view of the room's power dynamics. "It's always interesting to see everyone in their natural habitat." "Indeed." His eyes followed Gregory's progress through the crowd. "Your husband seems to be having a successful evening." Gregory does enjoy these events. He's very good at making connections. "I'm sure he is." Marcus's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught the subtle emphasis on the word connections. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the elaborate social dance unfolding around us. Near the bar, Tom Alden was holding court with a group of younger businessmen, gesturing expansively with his drink. At a table near the stage, Patricia Wells was deep in conversation with several other out-of-town investors. "I've been meaning to ask," I said casually, "what's your impression of the local investment climate, from a professional perspective?" Marcus glanced at me with renewed interest. "That's a surprisingly sophisticated question. I've been doing some reading lately, trying to understand Gregory's world better." "Ah." Marcus sipped his champagne thoughtfully. "Well, there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm in certain sectors, biotech particularly, though enthusiasm and sound fundamentals don't always align." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say that some opportunities are being promoted more aggressively than their actual prospects might warrant. It's not uncommon in emerging markets. People get caught up in the potential and lose sight of the reality." I absorbed this information while watching Gregory introduce Lydia to a group of potential investors. The way she laughed at something he said, the way his hand lingered on her elbow just a moment too long. It was all very professional, very appropriate, and completely unconvincing to anyone who knew what to look for. "That must create opportunities for more conservative investors," I observed. Marcus smiled. "You have been doing your reading." Our conversation was interrupted by the evening's main event, a presentation about the charity's work, followed by the traditional auction of luxury items donated by local businesses. I participated dutifully, bidding on a spa package and a weekend at a local resort, playing my expected role in the community theatre. But my attention was focused elsewhere. During the auction, I noticed Patricia Wells bidding aggressively on a wine collection donated by Tom Alden's restaurant investment. She won it for nearly twice its estimated value, a gesture that seemed designed to send a message rather than acquire wine. After the formal program ended, the crowd dispersed into smaller groups for more intimate networking. I found myself in the ladies' room, touching up my lipstick, when Lydia Parkson walked in. "Evelyn, right?" she said, approaching the mirror beside mine. "We met at your dinner party last week." "Of course. Lovely to see you again." "You have such a beautiful home. Gregory's very lucky." "Thank you." I capped my lipstick and turned to face her directly. "I understand you've been working very closely with him on the biotech portfolio." Something flickered in Lydia's eyes. It's been a challenging project. Requires a lot of attention to detail. I'm sure it does. All those late nights, weekend meetings, it must be exhausting. The work is very demanding, she agreed, her voice carefully measured. I smiled at her, the same polite smile I'd perfected over years of suburban social warfare. Well, I certainly appreciate your dedication. Gregory speaks very highly of your collaboration. The pause before the last word was barely perceptible, but Lydia caught it. Her composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something sharper underneath. Gregory is an excellent mentor, she said. I've learned so much from working with him. I'm sure you have. We stood there for a moment, two women in evening gowns having a perfectly civilized conversation that was really about something else entirely. Then Lydia excused herself and left, her heels clicking against the marble floor with just a bit more force than necessary. I remained at the mirror for another minute, studying my reflection. The woman looking back at me was still recognizably the suburban wife who'd attended this event for 15 years. But there was something new in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before Gregory's casual announcement about splitting everything. When I returned to the ballroom, I found Gregory deep in conversation with Tom and several other men near the bar. Their body language suggested serious business discussion despite the social setting. There you are, Gregory said as I approached. We were just discussing the Patterson Industries opportunity. Patterson Industries, one of the biotech companies on my watch list, and one that Marcus had subtly suggested might be overvalued. Sounds interesting, I said. What kind of opportunity? Tom launched into an explanation about breakthrough treatments and market potential, his enthusiasm infectious. The other men nodded along, clearly impressed by the projected returns he was describing. But I was watching Gregory's face, and I saw something there that made me pause. A tightness around his eyes, a forced quality to his smile. He was selling this opportunity hard, but he didn't look like a man who was confident in what he was selling. It sounds very promising, I said when Tom finished his pitch, though I imagine there are risks involved too. Every investment has risks, Gregory said quickly, but the potential rewards far outweigh them in this case. Of course. I sipped my champagne and glanced around the group. I was talking to Marcus Williams earlier, and he mentioned that some biotech opportunities are being promoted more aggressively than their fundamentals might support. I suppose the key is knowing which ones are solid and which ones are just hype. The temperature in the group seemed to drop several degrees. Tom's jovial expression hardened, and Gregory's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus Williams is known for being overly conservative, Tom said. He misses a lot of opportunities because he's afraid to take calculated risks. That's probably why he's been so successful, I replied innocently. Conservative approaches do tend to preserve capital over the long term. Gregory placed his hand on my elbow, his grip just firm enough to be a warning. Darling, I think the Hendersons are looking for you. Something about the hospital fundraiser committee. It was a dismissal, politely delivered but unmistakable. I smiled at the group and allowed myself to be guided away, but not before I saw the look that passed between Gregory and Tom. They were worried. Good. The evening wound down with the usual round of goodbyes and promises to get together soon. Gregory was quieter than usual during the drive home, his hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. You seem to enjoy yourself tonight, he said as we pulled into our driveway. It was a lovely event. The charity raised quite a bit of money. You spent a lot of time talking to Marcus Williams. He's an interesting conversationalist, very knowledgeable about market conditions. Gregory's laugh had a sharp edge. Marcus Williams is a has-been who's afraid of his own shadow. He hasn't made a significant return in 5 years. Really? That's not what I heard. What exactly did you hear? I turned to look at him in the dim light of the garage. Just that he has a reputation for avoiding the kind of scandals that sometimes affect more aggressive investors. There's a difference between avoiding scandals and avoiding success, Evelyn. I'm sure you're right. I opened my car door and stepped out. You know so much more about these things than I do. Inside the house, Gregory disappeared into his study to review some documents, while I went upstairs to change out of my gala attire. But instead of going to bed, I opened my laptop and began researching Patterson Industries in detail. What I found was disturbing. The company's financials were weaker than Tom's presentation had suggested. Their clinical trials had produced mixed results, and several key executives had sold significant portions of their stock holdings in recent months. More troubling was what I discovered about the promotion campaign. Multiple investment firms were pushing Patterson Industries simultaneously, using almost identical talking points and projections. It had all the hallmarks of a coordinated effort to inflate the stock price artificially. I checked my own portfolio. My small biotech positions were still performing well, but I'd been careful to diversify across multiple companies rather than concentrating on any single opportunity. On impulse, I opened a new browser tab and searched for recent SEC filings related to Patterson Industries. There was an ongoing investigation into potential market manipulation, and several firms that had been aggressively promoting the stock were now under scrutiny, including, according to a list buried deep in a regulatory filing, Marsh Capital. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Gregory wasn't just having an affair and planning to divorce me. He was potentially involved in securities fraud, and he was using his firm's reputation to promote investments that might be worthless. My phone buzzed with a text message. Claire's name appeared on the screen. Had such a good time at the gala. We should definitely do lunch this week. I stared at the message, remembering how Claire had barely spoken to me at the event, too busy networking with the other mothers planning their children's weddings. Another friendship that had become conditional, dependent on my status as Gregory's wife and my usefulness to other people's social agendas. I deleted the message without responding. Then I opened my trading platform and began placing orders. Not for biotech stocks this time, but for put options on Patterson Industries and several other companies in Tom and Gregory's portfolio. If they were going to collapse, I might as well profit from it. As I worked, I could hear Gregory moving around in his study downstairs, probably preparing for whatever crisis was coming. He'd built his career on confidence and connections, on the assumption that he could talk his way out of any problem and charm his way into any opportunity. But confidence was just another word for arrogance when it wasn't backed by competence. And charm only worked on people who didn't know what you were really doing. I closed the laptop and finally got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new moves in the game that Gregory still didn't realize we were playing. But tonight, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The call came at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, while Gregory was in the shower and I was reading the financial news over coffee. Patricia Wells's name appeared on my phone screen, a number I'd quietly obtained from the country club's member directory. "Mrs. Marsh, this is Patricia Wells. We met at your dinner party last week." "Of course. How can I help you?" "I was wondering if we could meet for coffee this morning. There are some matters I'd like to discuss with you privately." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "That sounds intriguing. What time works for you?" 9 o'clock, the coffee shop on Elm Street. "I'll see you there." Gregory emerged from the bathroom as I was hanging up, his hair still damp and his expression already focused on whatever crisis awaited him at the office. "Who was that?" he asked, reaching for his tie. "Patricia Wells. She wanted to get together for coffee." Gregory's hand stilled on his tie. "Patricia Wells? Why?" "She didn't say. Probably something social. You know how these networking relationships work." "Evelyn." Gregory's voice carried a warning tone I'd learned to recognize over the years. "Patricia Wells isn't a social coffee kind of person. She's a serious investor with serious money, and she doesn't waste time on suburban housewife friendships." "Then I suppose I'll find out what she really wants." Gregory finished knotting his tie with sharp, precise movements. Be careful what you say to her. She's not someone you want to cross. I'll keep that in mind. After Gregory left, I spent an hour researching everything I could find about Patricia Wells and her investment firm. What I discovered was both impressive and intimidating. She had a reputation for identifying fraud and market manipulation with surgical precision, and she'd been responsible for exposing several high-profile financial scandals over the past decade. If Patricia Wells wanted to meet with me, it wasn't for social reasons. The coffee shop on Elm Street was busy with the usual morning crowd of commuters and stay-at-home parents, but Patricia had chosen a corner table that offered privacy and a clear view of the entrance. She stood as I approached, extending her hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice," she said. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering for both of us." 2 lattes sat on the small table, along with a folder that Patricia kept close to her side. "I'll get straight to the point," she continued after we'd settled into our chairs. "I'm investigating some irregularities in the biotech sector, and your husband's firm has come to my attention." I managed to keep my expression neutral, despite the adrenaline surge. "What kind of irregularities?" "Coordinated promotion of stocks that don't have the fundamentals to support their current valuations. Market manipulation, essentially, though proving it requires careful documentation." Patricia opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "These are trading records showing unusual activity patterns around the companies that Marsh Capital has been promoting. The timing is too consistent to be coincidental." I studied the papers she'd placed in front of me, recognizing several company names from Gregory and Tom's dinner conversations. The trading patterns showed massive buy orders, followed by aggressive promotional campaigns, then systematic selling by insiders. "This is very concerning," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure why you're sharing it with me." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Because I think you know more about your husband's business than you let on, and because I think you might be willing to help me prove what's really happening." The moment stretched between us, filled with the ambient noise of coffee shop conversations and the hiss of espresso machines. I was standing at a crossroads, and the choice I made would determine everything that came next. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing illegal, nothing that would put you at risk. Just pay attention, document what you observe, help me understand the internal dynamics at Marsh Capital." I took a sip of my latte, buying time to think. Patricia was offering me exactly what I'd been working toward, a way to bring down Gregory's house of cards, but accepting would make me an active participant in his destruction rather than just a passive beneficiary. "There would be protections for you," Patricia continued. "Whistleblower status, legal immunity, financial compensation if the investigation leads to successful prosecution." "And if I say no?" "Then I continue my investigation through other channels, but it will take longer, and the evidence might not be as comprehensive." I looked at the documents spread across our small table. Months of careful analysis, trading records, financial projections. Patricia had done her homework, and she was offering me a chance to be part of the solution rather than just another victim. "I'll need some time to think about it," I said. "Of course, but not too much time. These schemes have a way of collapsing suddenly, and when they do, the people closest to them get hurt the most." Patricia gathered her documents and stood to leave. "My card is in the folder. Call me when you've made your decision." After she left, I remained at the coffee shop for another hour, staring at the business card she'd left behind. Patricia Wells, Senior Partner, Meridian Investigations. Below her name was a phone number and an email address that could change the trajectory of my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Gregory. "How did coffee go?" I typed back, "Fine, just social chatter." But as I drove home through the familiar streets of Ridgeview, I realized that nothing about my life was social chatter anymore. Every conversation was strategic, every relationship was transactional, every choice was calculated. Gregory had taught me that, even if he didn't realize it. I spent the afternoon monitoring my investment portfolio, which had grown substantially over the past month. My put options on Patterson Industries were already showing significant gains as the stock price began to decline, and my diversified positions in more stable companies provided a solid foundation for long-term growth. More importantly, I'd established EM Holdings as a legitimate investment entity with a track record of smart, conservative decisions. If Gregory's world collapsed, I would have something to fall back on. At 4 o'clock, my phone rang. Tom Alden's name appeared on the screen. "Evelyn, is Gregory available? I've been trying to reach him all day." "He's in meetings. Can I take a message?" "Tell him we need to talk. Today, it's urgent." There was something in Tom's voice I'd never heard before. Panic, barely controlled. "Is everything all right?" Just tell him to call me as soon as possible." The line went silent, leaving me staring at my phone. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating beyond Gregory's ability to control it. I was still processing Tom's call when Gregory burst through the front door at 5:30, his usual composure completely shattered. "Did Tom call here?" he demanded without preamble. "Yes, he said it was urgent." Gregory was already dialing his phone, pacing across our living room like a caged animal. "Tom, what the hell is going on?" I couldn't hear Tom's side of the conversation, but Gregory's responses told the story clearly enough. "What do you mean, frozen accounts?" "Since when?" "That's impossible. We followed all the regulations." "How much are we talking about?" "Jesus Christ, Tom." Gregory ended the call and stood in the middle of our living room, staring at his phone as if it might provide answers to questions he didn't want to ask. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Some kind of regulatory issue. Probably just a misunderstanding, but it's going to require some careful handling." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Gregory looked at me as if he'd forgotten I was there. "No, this is complicated business stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." But the fear in his eyes told a different story. That evening, while Gregory locked himself in his study for a series of increasingly agitated phone calls, I made my decision. I retrieved Patricia Wells's business card from my purse and dialed her number. "I'd like to meet again," I said when she answered. "Tomorrow morning, if possible." "I'll make time. Same place?" "Perfect." "Evelyn, you're making the right choice." As I hung up the phone, I could hear Gregory's voice through his study door, raised in anger or desperation. The confident, controlling man who'd announced our financial split just a few weeks ago was discovering that some things couldn't be managed through force of personality. I opened my laptop and checked the after-hours trading activity. Patterson Industries had dropped another 12%, and several other companies in Gregory's portfolio were showing similar declines. The house of cards was beginning to collapse, just as Patricia had predicted. My put options were now worth more than my original emergency fund, and EM Holdings showed a portfolio return of over 30% in less than 6 weeks. I'd learned to pull my own weight, exactly as Gregory had demanded. He just hadn't anticipated what that weight might be used for. Tomorrow, I would become Patricia Wells's inside source. Tonight, I would sleep soundly while Gregory's world crumbled around him. The equity of silence I was discovering was far more valuable than I'd ever imagined. The Meridian Tower's 42nd floor offered a commanding view of the city's financial district, where glass and steel monuments to capitalism stretched toward a grey November sky. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Patricia Wells's conference room, watching the morning traffic crawl through the canyon of buildings below. "Nervous?" Patricia asked, joining me at the window with 2 cups of coffee. Strangely, no. I accepted the coffee and turned to face the conference table where Patricia's legal team was arranging documents. I thought I would be, but mostly I just feel ready. That's a good sign. It means you've processed the emotional component and you're thinking strategically now. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd provided Patricia with detailed information about Gregory's business practices, Tom's promotional schemes, and the internal dynamics at Marsh Capital. The evidence we'd assembled was comprehensive and damning, enough to support both civil and criminal charges. Today was the confrontation. They should be here any minute, Patricia's lead attorney, Michael Chen, announced from his position near the door. Both Gregory Marsh and Tom Alden have confirmed their attendance, along with their legal representation. I took my seat at the conference table, positioned so I could see Gregory's face when he walked in. Patricia had explained the strategy: present the evidence methodically, offer a settlement that would minimize criminal exposure in exchange for full cooperation, and let Gregory's own arrogance work against him. The door opened at exactly 10 o'clock. Gregory entered first, wearing his most expensive suit and the confident expression he'd perfected for difficult negotiations. Tom followed behind him, looking considerably less composed, accompanied by 2 lawyers I didn't recognize. Gregory's step faltered when he saw me sitting at the conference table, but he recovered quickly. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" "Representing EM Holdings," I replied calmly. "We have significant financial interests in this matter." "EM Holdings?" Gregory's eyes narrowed as he processed the initials. "That's impossible." Patricia gestured toward the empty chairs across from us. "Gentlemen, please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Patricia presented the evidence systematically: trading records, email communications, financial statements that showed the true condition of the companies Gregory and Tom had been promoting. Gregory maintained his composure through most of it, occasionally objecting or offering alternative explanations. But I could see the moment when the full scope of their exposure became clear. His face went pale, and his hands clenched into fists on the table. "This is all circumstantial," one of his lawyers protested. "Aggressive marketing isn't illegal." "You're right," Patricia agreed, "but securities fraud is, and market manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud investors." She placed a final document on the table, a detailed analysis of Gregory's personal trading activity, showing how he'd systematically sold his own positions in the promoted companies while encouraging clients to buy more. "The pattern is unmistakable," Patricia continued. "Promote the stocks publicly, sell privately, leave the clients holding worthless paper when the scheme collapses." Tom Alden broke first. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were just trying to generate some momentum. The companies had potential." "Tom," Gregory's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't say another word." But Tom was beyond caring about Gregory's commands. "She's right, Greg. We knew those clinical trials were failing. We knew Patterson Industries was going to miss their earnings projections. We kept promoting them anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Gregory stared at his oldest friend with a mixture of rage and betrayal, while Tom slumped in his chair like a man who'd finally stopped running from the inevitable. "Mr. Marsh," Patricia said quietly, "we're prepared to offer you a settlement, full cooperation with our investigation, complete disclosure of all relevant financial records, and restitution to affected investors. In exchange, we'll recommend reduced criminal charges and allow you to retain certain personal assets." Gregory's lawyer leaned in to whisper something in his ear, but Gregory waved him away. His eyes were fixed on me now, and I could see the moment when he finally understood what had really happened. "You did this," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fury. "You've been planning this from the beginning." "No," I replied. "You did this. I just paid attention." "All those questions about my business, the dinner parties, the social conversations, you were gathering intelligence." "I was learning to pull my own weight, exactly like you told me to." Gregory stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "This is insane. Evelyn, you don't understand what you're doing. If Marsh Capital goes down, you lose everything too. The house, the lifestyle, the social position, all of it depends on my success. I opened my portfolio folder and placed a single document on the table, EM Holdings' current financial statement, showing assets worth more than $3 million. Actually, I said, I think I'll be fine. The number hit Gregory like a physical blow. He stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing without sound. How is that possible? Conservative investing, diversified portfolio, careful risk management. I smiled at him, the same polite smile I'd been giving him for 18 years. All those skills you assumed I didn't have. Patricia cleared her throat. Mr. Marsh, we need a decision. Accept our settlement offer, or we proceed with full criminal prosecution. Gregory's lawyers huddled around him, speaking in urgent whispers. I could see the calculation happening in his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism, arrogance versus survival. Finally, he looked up. What exactly are the terms? The negotiation took another 2 hours. In the end, Gregory agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, surrender his ownership stake in Marsh Capital, and pay substantial restitution to affected investors. Tom accepted a similar deal, though his financial exposure was somewhat less severe. As the lawyers finalized the paperwork, Gregory approached me at the window, where I'd returned to watch the city below. 18 years of marriage, he said quietly, and I never knew you were capable of this. You never bothered to find out. What happens now? Between us, I mean. I turned to face him. The man who'd controlled every aspect of my life for nearly 2 decades suddenly looked smaller, diminished by the loss of the power and status that had defined him. Now you learn to pull your own weight, I said, just like you taught me. The settlement documents were signed at 4:30 that afternoon. By 5 o'clock, Gregory Marsh was no longer the owner of Marsh Capital, and Tom Alden was facing bankruptcy along with potential criminal charges. I rode the elevator down to the lobby alone, my reflection multiplied in the polished steel walls. The woman looking back at me was still recognizably the suburban wife who'd stood in her kitchen 6 months ago, listening to her husband announce their financial split. But everything else had changed. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Heard about Gregory's business troubles. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges once burned weren't worth rebuilding. Outside the Meridian Tower, the city hummed with its usual energy. People pursuing ambitions, building careers, making deals, destroying competitors. The same forces that had shaped Gregory's rise and fall, but viewed now from a different perspective. I had learned something important over the past 6 months. Silence wasn't weakness or submission. It was patience. It was preparation. It was the space between words where real power accumulated. Gregory had mistaken my quietness for ignorance, my cooperation for dependency, my support for subservience. He'd built his empire on the assumption that he was the only one in our marriage capable of strategic thinking. He'd been wrong. As I walked toward the parking garage where my car waited, I thought about the future. EM Holdings would continue to grow, built on the foundation of careful research and conservative principles. The house in Ridgeview would be sold, replaced by something smaller, but entirely mine. The social connections that had defined my old life would fade, replaced by relationships based on mutual respect rather than social utility. It would be a different kind of life, but it would be mine to control. My phone rang as I reached my car. Patricia Wells's name appeared on the screen. How are you feeling? She asked. Liberated, I said, and realized it was true. Good. You should be proud of what you accomplished today. Not many people have the courage to rebuild their entire life from scratch. I had excellent motivation. Patricia laughed. That you did. Listen, I have a proposition for you. Meridian Investigations could use someone with your analytical skills and attention to detail. Interested in a career change? I looked up at the Meridian Tower, stretching toward the grey sky, then at my reflection in my car's window. The same face, but with eyes that had learned to see clearly. "Very interested," I said. 6 months ago, Gregory had told me I was on my own and needed to learn to pull my own weight. He'd meant it as a threat, a way to put me in my place and remind me of my dependence on his success. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift of my life, the motivation to discover who I really was when I stopped being who he needed me to be. The equity of silence, I'd learned, wasn't about what you didn't say. It was about what you chose to do while everyone else was busy talking. And I had chosen very carefully indeed.